So far, we have looked at actors and managers. But there is a third profession that is often overlooked in this period of globalized theatre: agents. By 1900, the theatrical landscape, and I'm speaking here just of the Western-style theatre, had established itself on all continents except Antarctica. The demand for artists and productions was huge, which led in turn to a new profession, the agent. Now, agents were by no means a new phenomenon, but their importance increased dramatically as the theatrical landscape globalized. Agents and agencies dealt in theatre, opera, vaudeville, variety, music, art. Their activities did not remain within national borders, but had a truly transnational dimension. An agent in Vienna would book acts for a circus in India, an American impresario would organize a tour of performers in South Africa, a German agent could become the representative for German playwrights in France, and so on. My colleague Nick Leonhardt is researching this fascinating but largely neglected topic, and she has agreed to talk to us about some of her agents. Can you perhaps just, first of all, define what a theatrical agent is or was in those days?
Well, it's very difficult to define because the way they used the term agent in those days is very different, and it differs from country to country. And some of the agents I'm dealing with call themselves managers, some of them call themselves impresarios, and some of them even call themselves brokers. So it's really difficult to define what an agent is, but I would say there are certain sort of mediators between actors and theaters, actors and directors and dancers and opera singers and theaters and so on. Theatrical agents organize all the contracts between actors and directors and actors and theaters and plays and playwrights. So he's organizing all the things that have to do with theatrical business in those days.
So can you tell us then why agents or theatrical agents were so important for theatrical globalization?
Well, I think they are very crucial for theatre and globalization because they organized all the international trade, the international trade routes and all the traffic and so on. And they organized all the royalties, and they bought plays, and they would hire the actors and made contracts with them in a very international way.
No name springs to mind. I can think of many famous actors, directors, theatre managers, but not agents. Who are these people? Can you give some examples?
I must say that it's also very difficult to do research on these people because they've almost been forgotten in theatre history and in theatre studies as well. And it has to do with the fact that theatre has been considered a business in those days, but not in terms of scholarly research. For instance, I'm dealing with one agent. His name is H.B. Marinelli, and before he became a manager and agent, he was a contortionist and a circus dancer and equilibrist. So he was an artist himself, and then he turned into an agent. Another example is Elizabeth Marbury. She is an American agent based in both New York and Paris. She dealt with playwrights and also performers and dancers. And another example for a male agent is Richard Pitroot. And as Marinelli, before he became an agent, he was an impersonator. He would impersonate Abraham Lincoln and other presidents of the United States and was very, very famous for that. And what they have all in common was that they had very cosmopolitan biographies. So they had branch offices in all parts of the world, and they would travel tremendously and so on. So for instance, Pitrout, who was based in New York, he would travel to Europe very often, several times a year, in order to look what was going on in the big cities in Europe, and would buy the plays, and then would hire also actors, but also dancers and groups, and bring them to the United States. And Alice Corsa would do the same for playwrights.
So who is Alice Corsa? This is a new name?
Oh, that's a new name. I forgot to mention that name when I listed the agents I'm working on. Alice Corsa is another very interesting agent. She was born in Hungary, and she was the stepdaughter of Franz Liszt, the composer. And then she was the daughter of an American and then a German mother, and then she moved to the United States when she was a teenager, and she worked for Elizabeth Marbury, the other agent I mentioned, and then she opened her own office when she was about 20 years old, and she specialized in bringing playwrights from Europe to the United States. For instance, she would bring Maurice Maeterlinck, the Belgian playwright and Nobel Prize winner in the United States, and vice versa. She also was agent for Bonnet Shaw, for instance.
So you could almost say that without someone like Alice Causer, Maurice Maeterlinck might not even have been known or performed in the United States.
Maybe, yes, yeah. Another very famous figure she brought to the United States was Henrik Ibsen. The more I do research on these agents, I'm more fascinated I am by the fact that exactly when I ask myself that question, so how comes that a playwright like Henrik Ibsen was performed in the United States? And I think it's possible. It was possible only because of agents like Alice Causer.
So in a sense, the theatrical agents are a kind of missing link in theatrical modernism.
Yeah.
We've been talking about agents in globalization or theatrical globalization. Should we take an example, say someone like Marinelli? I mean, could you perhaps explain how this globalization worked, or how could we even conceptualize it?
I'm still wondering how he managed to do that, because he worked internationally and he was here and there at the same time. I brought one example, namely the letterhead that he was using in the 19-teens. And that letterhead shows the branch offices he had in Paris, London, Berlin, and New York. And the way he demonstrates how he works on that letterhead is quite fascinating. The letterhead shows 4 different cablegrams that are connected via cables, and in the background of the letterhead you can see a world map and various cables that connect the branches and connect Marinelli with the actors and the people he would do business with. So it's really interesting that he uses that simple letterhead as a means for demonstrating how professional, how very modern, because of the cablegram he's using, a very new medium still in the 19-teens, and the way he shows how internationally he works. So only via that letterhead, and it's a fascinating source for me to find out about the way he worked.
So the letterhead, in a sense, demonstrates connectivity, which is a concept we've been working with in the course.
Yes, exactly. It demonstrates connectivity, but it also demonstrates the way Marinelli wants to see and wants to represent himself. It's so crucial to study them in order to find out how theater and globalization work together in the 19th and early 20th century. And I would even say without theatrical agents, theater and globalization in those days wouldn't be possible.
During the second half of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, theater was a commercial enterprise and part of a highly profitable entertainment industry. All over Europe, the Americas and their colonies, huge fortunes could be made by supplying colonial audiences with the latest plays and productions from home. Without the competition of film and later radio and television, theatre, opera, vaudeville and operetta productions provided the most important mass entertainment of the time. Europeans exported these divertissements, but as we have seen from the Japanese and Parsi examples, locals soon adapted these models. By the 1930s, the model of touring theatre, dominated by managers and agents, was beginning to collapse. High costs and competition from cinema meant that theatre needed a new model. This would come after the end of the Second World War, when governments began to recognize theatre's importance as a public good. This story will be continued in a later module.